Hey everyone, Lilian here, and today I want to talk about View Transitions API. The first thing to know about View Transitions is that it's something quite new into the LiveView ecosystem. You can't expect that you're gonna have some great primitives for it, but I actually baked some helpers that you can add into your project. As of now, there's no standard Phoenix way of adding View Transitions into your code. What I'm going to show you is my version on how I want to do this, but you can make it better and share with the community. So eventually we can manage to slip something into Phoenix or LiveView directly. Anyone can benefit from those transitions. What the heck is View Transitions API? Think about when you have some page transitions that you want to make something pretty out of it. Say I am in comunidadedevsnorte.com and what I want to do is when I switch from one page to another, I want to have some specific effects. The most basic version of that you can have is basically have some sort of fade or opacity thing. I'm gonna press the about page link and we're gonna see some smooth transition. Cool and all, but this is like the default one. What we actually want to see is something powerful. So let's check out how we handle transitions between the main page and the event page or the project page. So we have an event right here. When I press it, it has some sort of moving things from place to place. That's pretty much the basics of how you can match elements from the previous page to other pages. One other way that you can visualize the view transitions is actually using the debugging tools, Command Shift and P, and I'm gonna search for show animations, and then it's gonna open right here for me. I'm gonna clear this one. Let's press anything. I'm gonna make it slower, 10% of the speed, so it's gonna be quite easy to spot things. And then when I press a project, we can see that the parts of the small project element are going to be transposed into the bigger version when we are actually in the project page. And behind the scenes, what actually happens is that your browser is gonna insert some special elements that look pretty much like a snapshot of how things are. Think of it like you have an image of before and an image that's going to be the end state. And how it's going to happen is that you can tell the browser how you want to move things, how you want to handle opacity, how you want to handle translations, and every single CSS property you often use for other kind of transitions. So let's take a peek at it. This time I'm gonna pause the next animation. When I trigger it, I can actually see it rolling. Say I go back to the main page and then I have the animation blocked right here, and then I can press this to actually play the animation, and then we have it gone. But let's do it once more, but this time we're gonna use the timeline. I press this project right here, and as you can see, something already changed. We can see in the Elements tab of your DevTools that we have many view transition groups, which is pretty much how your browser is gonna handle going from X to Y. And then we know that we pressed this one, but actually since the way that we developed it was that we had multiple elements being transposed. As you can see, there's view transition group for the avatar, which is the image, for the title, for the short description. And then when we open these things right here, we have a sort of a pair, which is the old snapshot and the new snapshot. We can use the DevTools to see how we're gonna handle those. Now that we have the stopped animation, we can just smoothly scroll right here. I think something went wrong, so I'm gonna play it instead. And then there you go. Now let's see how to install the View Transitions API on your existing LiveView project. Installation is quite easy. Don't worry if you can't follow the video, because I'm gonna write an article right here on adopt-liveview.debugging.dev. I'm gonna have a breakdown on which scripts and which LiveView parts you have to do in order to manage to get some fancy animations between your pages. Now let's go back to the video, and I have this open source project, which is Rolezinhos. And for those who don't know Portuguese, basically a rolezinho is a small gathering of folks. So an event, you can see the code which is public on my GitHub page, link in the description below. So make sure you give a like if you want to see the source code. Current production page doesn't have any view transitions at all. So we're gonna install that in my local version, and it's gonna look like this. We didn't do much fancy things. We just added for the title of the event, and we have a back animation just like we have in the DevsNord community. And then let's see what it actually takes for that to happen. So there you go. As you can see on the left side, we have a div. We changed a little bit of CSS, JS, ignore my dev.exs. I just changed the port so I could try it, not a port, the host, so I could try it on my cell phone. We also changed a little bit of how events are handled. As you can see, I had some naming issues because there's pull-it and there's also event. The first part of it is actually adding some CSS to your code. I'm gonna view the file here, and then I'm gonna scroll down. To make things easier for me to understand what's happening, I added a small section that I called view transitions. And then on the root context, I actually added that the enter animation and exit animation variables are these ones. Don't worry much about it. I'm not a CSS master. I barely know CSS at all. So I just copied that from some examples out in the internet. And then what we have to install is using the property @viewTransition, we basically just say that navigation auto uses view transition type page. I'm not an expert on view transitions API. You can see the documentation and links gonna be below here. And then we also make sure to disable the view transitions API if the media actually prefers lower motion. That's for accessibility's sake. Maybe even some battery saving things sometimes gonna enable it. I don't know. And then I just created some example animations, nothing fancy. We have the fades, we have slides from right, left. I just copy and pasted that from the DevsNord community, and you pretty much can get any sort of translation that you found on the internet and apply to your project. Don't worry much about it. And then here's the fancy thing that you need to think about. We're gonna have some pseudo selectors, which are view transition old and view transition new, when you want to apply the styles to specifically parts of the snapshot that I just talked about. So you can apply some CSS to the old thing, you can apply some CSS to the new thing, you can apply some CSS to the group itself, which contains both of them. Let's go for the JavaScript part. The interesting bit about this right here is that we wouldn't be able to actually create view transitions back in October 2025. Let me show you why. And the reason for that is this right here. The community discussed a little bit on how to manage CSS view transitions API, and then the new method that was added to LiveView was actually on document patch. Basically, after some discussions on how should be handle view transitions and how to stack that into Virtual DOM, this method right here was created. And mad props to the folks that actually discussed this. As you can see, we have something on Elixir forum, like how we can do this. And then there's other links to folks that actually implemented it. There's this amazing gist about view transitions using a single file LiveView project that I used to base my work both on the community page on this video. So mad props to Stefan. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Also, I had to look into how basically non-LiveView projects did that. So things like this were possible. So show high details, click in this, the fancy things. Links will be in the description as usual. So we are back at our app.js, and here we have some global variables, which are transition types, transition elements, and schedule transition. These are the main thing that we need to actually tell LiveView that there's some transition happening. They're kind of sort of intercepting the DOM changes that are happening, basically because of the virtual DOM implementation of LiveView. And then the first thing you're gonna do is add this just before your live socket creation. And on your live socket, pretty much you're gonna just paste this entire thing, again, link in the description. Then what it says is, when something is triggering on document patch, we're gonna check if we have some transitions, and we support view transitions. And this is important because if the browser doesn't, you're just gonna lock out your folks from actually using our website. And then if we have some transition elements and there's a transition schedule, which we'll see really soon, and then we actually just call the element document.startViewTransition. And we're gonna say that it's gonna run the update function, which is right here. And the update function is gonna just do the transitions by adding the style, which is view transition name, to the correct elements. And when it's done, it's gonna run start, which is actually the callback from onDocument patch. So long story short, we check if there's some transitions schedule, and if so, we run them, and afterwards, we just empty the transition variables and continue with the done changes. Again, you don't need to really understand the internals of LiveView. You just need to copy and paste this in your code. After that, let's see what else is needed. The second part that we actually need to install View Transitions API is this small helper function that I created. We start View Transition, which takes an element, and then it basically will look into the options gave to the element, which are transition name. You're gonna push the elements to the list of the scheduled transitions. So we're basically telling LiveView, hey, this is one thing that should be handled before we actually patch the DOM entirely. And then nothing fancy here, we just say schedule transition true. And then I created an add event listening right here. So whenever something dispatches an event, PHX start view transition is gonna call that function. And we are gonna see right now how that works. For this, I created a JS hook. I could actually use some JS dispatch, JS exec, that's fine. There's examples on how to do that, but I think LiveView hooks are actually easier when you wanna just put something in many places. What this hook does is when the element is mounted, it adds a click event for it that checks if we wanna target the element itself or a parent element, and then it just adds the navigating CSS property. You can use that as your advantage, however you want. And then if there's a data/transition/name, it's gonna start a view transition for itself or the parent. It depends on what you chose. And then there's nothing fancy right here. It just triggers the navigation. So if you put the link in the href, it's gonna just work. So this is the last part. Don't forget that hooks actually need to be inserted into the configuration for your live socket. So I have the view transition hook. So now that we have the three things needed on app.js, we can look into the code itself. We are here, and then we have the colezinf. And each event, we want to make the matching transition between the title on the list and on the view page. Now that we have a JavaScript hook, we can actually do that by going to the element itself, which I know is in this file. And let me scroll down a little bit. Make sure your element has an ID, because that's required for JS hooks. And then I set the element ID, and I add PHX hook view transition hook. Since this is a link, it's gonna check the href and do its thing. You don't need to change everything else. The only difference between this and a generic link itself is one line, PHX hook. That's why I like using hooks on this case. And then we also need to name which element is gonna have the transition. So we go scroll into the title, and then let's see right here, data transition name, as I just showed you, match whole title. It could have been any string, like anything else, like just title. But the thing you have to mind is, if this is just title, the corresponding element also have to be just title. So I used match role title, whole title, because that's how I understand code. And then all I need to do is, let's go back to the event live itself. So I'm gonna view file, we have the whole card, and then we just say that it is our transition target by looking at the title. And here you go, the H1, which is the most important title here, has the view transition name match whole title. We just do 3 lines of code. We actually make the view transition work out of the box. And that's all in regards to our app.js code. You don't need to understand the app.js code. You just need to understand that you have to set the transition names between the files. And of course, I don't want to leave you hanging with just the basics. We gotta max out this thing right here. So let's talk about another way of doing the view transitions. In this case, I want to make sure that when I go back into the page, which is the event list, the home page, we actually show something. I could as easily just create the JS hook on the list link, but that would prevent me from having the same transition when I use the back scroll button. So for this, we can actually use some niceties from Phoenix. So let's go to the code. We can add to the article, which is all this thing right here, that when it's gonna be removed, which could be either because we're changing pages or something else, but in our case, just when I change pages, we're gonna dispatch, which is a JS command. And by using dispatch, we can actually just trigger the PHX start view transition, which we created on JavaScript. All you need to say is to which element we want to apply it. Since this is the same element, we could actually just remove it, but let's keep it as is. And then in the event details, I'm gonna say transition name, and I'm gonna call it role slide out left, which has page type transition. And if you look into my JS code right here, you're gonna see that it also supports event details. And then let me just look for it. Transition name. Yeah, here we go. And then if I say options transition name, it's gonna use that instead of looking into the data set. So we have the nicety order. And then all we need to run is anything that would remove me from this page to another page. So let's do this real quick. I'm gonna use the back button and it works. But as you can see, something happened. We have a yellow background. I told you that we're gonna look into that CSS later. So here we go. I'm gonna show you how to debug your transitions, because I'm quite sure that something is gonna go in a way that you don't want it to happen at some point. So you might as well learn how to debug it. So back into this, I'm gonna clear my animations tab and I'm gonna stop it. And then let's do something that will make me change. So I click it, and as you can see, in the stopped state, we can quite easily see that there's yellow background. And during the stopped time, you can see that we can look for the element. We have a brute element transition. We have the whole slide alt left, which is the name of the transition that I just showed you. So it's quite likely to be right here. And then by opening it, I can see that there's a pair of elements, and the slide alt, oh, here we go. We have a background color, which is yellow. So that's the issue. All I have to do is looking into my code, and I kind of prepared this beforehand. So let's go to the app.css file, and then I need to comment this one, and everything is gonna just work. So let me play, and now we have a fix for this. In case you have other issues, all you need to do is just stop your time and debug things one by one. So now you know how to install View Transitions API. You know the basics on how to add it. Since this video is already quite big, I want to stop right here, but do let me know in the comments if you want to learn more on how to do things right here. And also, if you happen to have View Transitions API in your LiveView, just let us know. So I want to improve this code right here. We can push things into the Phoenix extent, and they can actually look into how to convert that into some primitives that anyone can use without having to paste some code on the app.js or somewhere else. And all that you have to do is probably just add a property or something like that. But that's it for now. Make sure to subscribe if you like the content. I'm gonna be having more examples of that if that's what folks want, and comment about it. Make sure to leave a like, and see you next time.